Hello everybody, my name is Richie Porter and I'm the Dean of Students here at Trinity College Dublin, and it's my pleasure to interview Emeritus Professor of Anatomy at Trinity College Dublin, Moira O'Brien. So Moira, tell us about your early upbringing in Malaysia.
Oh, well, both my parents qualified from Trinity.
Oh, right.
And my father was one of the original Knights of the Campanile.
Get away.
Yep. And my mother got married on the strict understanding she would never have to cook. So that's why they went out to Malaysia. And we lived on the east coast in Kuantan. And we went to, as 4-year-old, I was sent up to Cameron Highlands, which was up in the mountains, to a co-ed school with my sister, my older sister. It took us 2 days to go up there, but it was fantastic because there were over 1,000 people there, and it was there was riding, there was hockey, there was everything.
So you were boarders there, were you?
We were well, 2 days to get there to Richie. We couldn't.
Very good.
But we had to always stop halfway up at a place called the Gap, which was at the bottom of a road, but they went up to a place called Fraser's Hill, which was the local. If you had local leave, you would go up there and you would play golf, and only one car could go up at a time. And later on, when I was looking for medical students in Trinity, no, it was when I left surgeons, they asked me would they give me silver. I said no. Okay. I wanted a trip to go back to Malaysia, but this was 30 years after I left it, and we stayed in the same place.
But your time then in Malaysia was interrupted, wasn't it?
Yeah, but when I was 8, the Japanese landed 100 miles up the coast from where we lived in Kuantan.
Wow.
And this is just before Christmas, so we had to. We stayed in Kuala Lumpur where my father went and picked up my mother, and 3.5 children, because she was expecting my youngest brother then, and we drove down to Singapore. Right. And we were there for 10 days, and the Japs were bombing because the British never thought that the Japs would come down there. Yeah. And we actually got out on the last boat that actually made it to Australia. But my father was
stayed behind, did he?
He deliberately stayed behind. He said as a doctor it was his duty to stay there.
Wow.
So he was a prisoner of war for 3.5 years, and during all that time we only heard once that he was still alive.
Wow.
But he was fantastic. He was a Northern Ireland Presbyterian who became a Catholic, but he was sports mad. He did every sport there was. So we were brought, any time we came home on leave, I was dragged down here to watch the boxing matches, because he had represented Trinity in the intervarsity boxing, and I still have his medal, and I got replicas made. I was going to bring.
What's his name?
J. McMahon.
J. McMahon. Okay.
It was the Knights performed in 26.
Okay.
And he was one of the original Knights.
Isn't that amazing?
So history kind of repeats itself.
Yeah.
So when I came back to Ireland, we went to boarding school. He went back to Malaysia afterwards. And if you're in the colonial service, you retired at 45. But I wanted to do medicine. He said that I was too young. And I said, well, I'd already done everything when I came back to Ireland at the age of 12, except Irish history and geography. And I was very good at languages, but I wanted to learn Irish.
Right.
And they said, we've got enough trouble teaching the people that had to. So I couldn't. So I said, well, I freeloaded. But it was when I left school here, I did the entrance exam to surgeons. And I left at Christmas. I had done... I got the entrance exam and got a scholarship into surgeons. And myself and my friend, who are still friends after 80 years,
What's her name?
Eileen, it was Eileen Mulligan, but it's Eileen Duffy now. Okay. We sat beside one another. Yeah. And pure fluke, we discovered that both our mothers had gone to a French school in Holyhead. And my mother was a real Francophile. Oh, right. So we had to speak French at the table. Lovely. And as a student, I spent 3 summers in the south of France with my sisters, with a friend of my mother's. And then I was an au pair outside Paris. So it made a great difference. And this is why when we went to Paris, we went to the Les Invalides, and they'd closed, and we said, well, our great ancestor was General MacMahon, who was the first president in France. Don't know whether we were or not, but we got into later on with it. And we went into a little nightclub. We were staying with a French friend who was in television, and we went into a little nightclub called La Panagile, and Edith Piaf came in and sang.
No way.
Yep. We were 16, and I could still kind of tall, small little person. And when she opened her mouth and sang, she sang La Vie à Rose and Me Lord, and
My word.
I can still see it. So it was amazing.
Pity you didn't have a camera phone then.
We didn't have anything. We were broke. We had no money at all.
Well, what a fantastic memory to have.
We were very lucky.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's kind of different because from having everything, we had nothing. And it was when we went to Australia that we realised how lucky we are, what good friends had helped us. And the nuns.
So when you went to Australia, where did you go to in Australia?
In Sydney.
Sydney, okay.
We'd actually booked to go to school in Normanhurst, the Loretto nuns.
Okay.
And they took 4 of us in for nothing. We didn't realise that. They were always saying special intentions. We didn't know what it was for.
Yeah.
And we were pretty wild. But they were so kind to us. But again, sport was everything.
Sure.
And we could, in Malaysia, we learned to swim practically before we could walk. And we played golf and we played tennis. And in any boarding school, if in those days you went in at the start of the term and you didn't come out till the end, the only way you could get out was to do sport.
Sure.
So we tried everything. It's made a big difference. It's essentially teaches you how to time management, but it also how to win and lose.
Yeah.
And to be a bad loser is the worst thing you can possibly be. So with good ethics.
Yeah, no, sports teaches you all those disciplines, right? So when you graduated from surgeons then, what happened next?
I did 6 months in the Meath Hospital.
Oh, right.
I was going to go to the States, but my uncle said I'd be very selfish just to kind of walk out and not stay, so 6 months was enough. Well, we were very young, Eileen and myself, and Adrian, who is now her husband. We decided that they went to the States, but I went over to Manchester. And I did a house job there, and then I did pathology for a year.
Okay, yeah.
But we were on duty every second night. So in those days there was no assistance. You did microbiology, biochemistry, histology, and how to kind of talk to people and do cross matches.
Sure, sure.
So it was very mixed things. But again, we played tennis there.
Okay, okay. So then how did you end up getting the job in surgeons in the end, an academic job in surgeons?
Well, what happened was that I got married, and when we got married, we went to live in Sheffield.
Okay.
And Sheffield was miles from the sea.
Right.
And it was just... I said, I've always lived by the sea. My husband had qualified from UCD. He said
Was he a medic as well?
He was a medic, yeah, but he was working with the coal board. So he said that we'd either emigrate to Australia, where my parents had gone. They went out in 57. I qualified 56. They went out in 50. My father went out in 57, and then 58 when I got married. All the rest of the family went out there. So I said, well, we'd either go out to Australia, or we'd emigrate. But I didn't want to. I knew that if I went to Australia and do GP with my husband, I knew who would be doing all the work. So I said, no way. Sure. So he got into Trinity, and he did medicine in Trinity.
Okay.
So I had a 6-month-old baby at that stage. So I was very lucky. I've got a wonderful person, a widow, who looked after my kids, and she was with me for 19 years.
Oh, wow.
So it was she did everything. I mean, I've never trained any of my kids. But she was typically Dublin. You come home, she taught them all the Irish dancing and rounders and things like that. We used to take her to the Shelburne and places. She had more class than most of the people that I was working with. So I went to surgeons.
So then when your husband came to Dublin, you came to surgeons then?
Yeah, but I was offered 4 jobs.
Oh, right.
So I was offered a job in the Rotunda in pathology and in the Meath Hospital. But I took the one with the shortest hours and the longest holidays. I never intended actually staying in anatomy, but when I went to surgeons, I played hockey for surgeons and swam at the InterVarsity swimming, so that I looked after the students. They had an inter-year competition, which was rugby, which was lethal.
Yeah.
So I used to go out and look after them.
Okay.
So I ended up then being doctor to the hospital's cup.
Oh, right.
Which was the first woman to ever do that.
I was going to say, you probably were the first woman to...
Oh, very much so. But the thing is that as I got involved in sports medicine, then I did my membership, got my fellowship. And
This was all while you were in surgeons?
All while. I was in surgeons for 25 years.
25 years,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't realise it was that long. Okay.
Yeah, and it was when the job came up in Trinity, I'd examined with Professor Erskine and Robbie Harrison, who was consultant and lecturing obs and gynae in Trinity.
Okay.
He was one of my ex-students, and he had actually played with the Beatles.
He had played with the Beatles?
The Beatles, he was from Liverpool.
No way.
Yeah. So, but Robbie was a character. So when the job came up, I was one of the candidates, and I took it on the strict understanding that I would set up sports medicine.
And had you set up some sports medicine elements while in surgeons?
Oh yes, yeah.
The National Dairy Council or something?
In '79, I was appointed the Olympic Medical Officer.
The Olympic Medical Officer.
And that meant that when I took over from Kevin O'Flanagan, I had to start from scratch. So this was for the Moscow Games. Right. So I went to Turku in Finland, and I met the Olympic medical officers, and I was very lucky because I had set up the Irish Sports Medicine Association in 1980.
Okay.
Well, not in 1980, but because I'd got involved, I'd got to know a lot of the sports medicine doctors from North and Northwest Europe.
Yeah.
And they were there, and they helped me.
Right.
And then when we came back, I set up. Austin Dara was working in James's. He was doing a lot of clinical research. Yeah. And I knew Austin, so he was looking for a lot of normal biochemical values. Yeah, yeah. And so as a result of that, I tested 200 people. I did all the bloods for them, but These
general public or athletes?
There were potential athletes. Okay. But only, I think only 45 actually made it. Okay. But of those, I tested physiologically, medically, and I used to do we only had a monarch bike, so we could only do sub-max VO2s.
So this was all still while in surgeons?
Oh yeah, and this was in the bathroom in James's, and every 20 minutes you'd have some guy, because there were mainly guys in those days, coming, tripping and doing this. So the one, what the hell, I was doing that, but we got a lot of data from that. Okay. And so that I knew of the potential. When we were going to Moscow, we didn't know what we were going to, because that was the time of the boycott.
Oh yes, of course. America boycotted.
The Americans boycotted, and Lord Killallen was the president then. Right. So they asked me would I look after them, the television, the radio, and all the Olympic family. So I said that I would only be prepared to look after them if I could examine them, and they all had to have their vaccinations. Right. And they all had to have their teeth checked. Right. That was the biggest problem, because some of them, some Irish people don't like going to the dentist and never go to the dentist, but unless I actually got a list, because flying, what they didn't realise is that if you've got an abscess, or even if you've got a filling, if you're going up and down, that destroys you. Okay. So it was very funny, because one of the television people was needle phobic, and he said he was not going to have any bloods done or anything. I said, well, tough. I'm not looking after you.
Look away.
But so when we went to Moscow, that was very different.
So tell us about Moscow then. I mean, it was behind the Iron Curtain then.
It was behind the Iron Curtain
And
there.
it must have been an amazing experience to go there. Was that your first trip behind the Iron Curtain?
That was the first one. I had lots of after that. But
so tell us, what was the state of play there for Ireland? Were there many women's events for Irish?
No. Well, we had a couple of swimmers. We had an archer, Hazel Green, and we had no women sailors.
No
there
women
were
sailors.
And we had a couple of athletes, but
Right.
very few women.
Right.
And then what happened there was that the Russians they just built new apartments, and the
Right.
first time, because of the boycott, instead of having 4 in each room, there were groups. There was four bedrooms.
Right.
But at that time, we were the first ones to go there.
Right.
And when we tried to get out, we couldn't get out. The door was locked.
Oh, right. So they confined you to the
The phones weren't working. So Ali Murphy was the physio. Had to climb. We were on the 12th floor. She had to climb down to the floor below.
No way.
So we could get out. And there were no kids because they'd removed all the kids from out of it. But it was very strange because we had a lot of rowers, and there were guns everywhere. And one particular event, we had to carry everything ourselves.
Right.
We had a medical bag. We were left at the stadium, but we had to go into the rowing basin, and there was a shortcut which would take about 10 minutes. But when we went to go the shortcut, the Russians said, "Nick." So I just said to them, "We're going there. There's no way I'm going to carry this."
Sure.
So they were so surprised that we just walked through. We didn't know. But the biggest thing about Moscow was that you had to watch everything you said.
Right.
And I was very lucky that because we had overall we had 60 people to look after.
Right.
And an awful lot of the athletes in those days, if you finished competing, you stayed.
Okay.
And the food was flown in from Texas.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, the Russians couldn't believe. I mean, they saw food that they'd never seen before.
Really?
And I mean, at one stage, some of the athletes got diarrhea because just eating too much kind of rich food.
Right.
And I was hauled up. The television came along, and I said, "Well, they've got diarrhea, but they couldn't spell diarrhea, so they put it down as typhoid." So Reuters were contacting me to kind of see. So it was kind of a little incident.
Sure.
And then the last day we were going to the closing ceremony. I mean, it was to see the people. The opening ceremony we couldn't go because some of the people were competing. And
Okay.
each morning when we were in Moscow, I got up and the island. We tested everybody. Every morning, checked the temperature to see that they had no effects of jet lag or dehydration or anything.
Right.
And then we did and in the evening we had a clinic again. We had a clinic all day.
Right.
But because we couldn't go to all the events that we wanted to, because I knew so many of the Northwest group, the Dutch and the Swedes would cover for the Irish for me. So, which was great, And on the last day, there was a trip to Leningrad that would fly out in the morning and come back in the evening. So there were just 9 of us went. And when we got on the plane, we were put at the very front of the plane so we wouldn't tarnish the Russians. And when we got out there, we went to the Hermitage Museum. It was one of the most beautiful cities.
Right.
Fantastic. But when we arrived back at the village, we discovered that they'd given our closing ceremony tickets away.
Oh, right.
And we were livid. But one of the guys had kept his opening. So we went down and we did the Irish thing of passing the ticket, and we all got in.
So you all got in on an opening ticket. Very good.
But it was wonderful because it's kind of to see. We were lucky. The sailors were there. Dave and Jane, and Hughie Russell had won a medal in boxing.
Yes.
And I'd gone to all the boxing. I had to go. And when we went there, I wore my father's boxing medal from Trinity, and kind of said, look, I'm a poor, I don't know anything about boxing. And they were so nice. And when Huey Russell got a bronze, we hugged and kissed him. And the Russian said, you treat your athletes so different to us, because if a Russian lost, they were sent home, they lost everything. And it was so sad to see.
Sure.
But it kind of made that the values were so different.
Very different, yeah.
So, but that was one of the things that we did.
So
when we came back from.
When you came back from Moscow, then when did you set up the performance?
That was 85.
85. Okay.
For the Los Angeles, we did we worked with the Jameses, and as a result of that, we monitored all the potential athletes.
Okay.
Right? But this time we had a treadmill, we had psychology, we had testing before and after eating. So we kept a record of everybody. But this was 80. In 82, the Dairy Council subsidized us.
Okay.
And as a result of that, all the potential ones, and there were less, we got a dietitian in Mary McCreary, and she did a full analysis. We did the psychological, we did the physiological, I did the medicals, and Mary was able to get a PhD out of it. But what would happen was that we saw them 4 times a year,
right.
And the cyclists were the best, because
right.
Pat McQuaid, you had to speak to the coaches. If you got the coach, he was the coach to the Cycling Federation, okay. And they all came, and we taught them the importance of dehydration.
Sure.
Because we'd learned from Moscow that some of the rowers were only drinking 500 ml of fluids a day.
All right.
And they were collapsing.
Okay.
All right. So it's the same thing with the cyclists. We said you have to rehydrate, and we were taught how to. What to do, but also how to during the races. We went to the training camps and the competitions of as many people. Looking back now, I wonder how I had time to go to sleep at all. But because I had such a good person minding my kids, I knew they were safe.
Sure.
And at that stage, we eventually, again, going to the States, we had to find out exactly what was happening. And the Olympic Medical Officers meeting this time was held in Phoenix, Arizona, and the temperature there was incredible. So I was lucky enough. I chatted to one of the American doctors, and his son was in UCLA, where we were going to be based.
Yeah.
But and he showed us around, and we weren't sure where we were going to. It was the main block, but on the side there were smaller blocks,
right.
And we were shown what they were doing. When we got there, we discovered that we were in H block. This is in the 80s, and I said, you have to take that down. I don't know whether you know what the H block was. That was where the prisoners in the north were in jail. So I was able to make contacts there. So then when we came back, when we flew out, we were very lucky. Paul Kostler did all our uniforms.
Did he really?
Oh, it was
lovely.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was real linen.
Right. Perfect for that climate.
Exactly, but it creases like hell. So when we got there, then when the Americans saw us, that's the genuine thing. But because I'd done a lot of work on circadian rhythm, I said, look, if we're going that way, we have to, particularly, adjust to jet lag. So we flew from Dublin to New York, and then down to San Diego. And it was when we were in the hotel in New York, we were on the 13th floor, and we discovered the next day, one of the guys looked exhausted, and I said, what the hell's wrong? I said, couldn't sleep. Your man sleepwalks, and he was going out the window all the time.
What?
And that was the first time we realized that how important it was to ask who sleepwalks, who snores, so that you don't put them in the same. Because if you are a light sleeper, and this is relevant in the soul. So we went down to San Diego for a week to adjust, and of course the Americans, all Irish, and all the girls were up looking for the boxes and all the rest of it.
All right.
So then we went back up to UCLA to discover that the rooms had no air conditioning. So we had to go down to the shop straight away and buy as many fans. We got the last fans that were there. No, we went a little bit earlier, because when the others came, there wasn't any. So but it was very interesting, because when we were based there, we had. The sailing was a little bit down. Rowing was way up in Santa Barbara.
Right.
The equestrian was again further away. So we had to again do the usual thing of testing in the morning. This was even more important, because the cyclists, where they were going to race, was it was a 5-hour circuit with the temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 degrees humidity. And we were the Irish were the only European team that actually finished the 5 circuits. The others all passed out, because we had warned our guys about rehydrating and getting them used to doing it.
Sure.
And we were taken, the medical staff were taught how to hand it. But despite the fact that we weighed them before they went out, that they never missed a drink.
Right.
And because of the temperature and the humidity, when we weighed them the next morning, they were still 5 kilos below their pre-race weight, because they were so dehydrated.
That's amazing.
And the biggest thing about that was that this was the first time that they had the women's marathon.
Yeah, you were saying that. The first women's marathon in the Olympics was in LA, 1994.
Exactly. And it was held at 11 o'clock in the day, middle of the heat. And they were very, very lucky that there wasn't a disaster, because we had some girls that stayed in the States. We had looked out, tested everybody, but the ones in the States thought that they knew it all. And it was the same with the Swiss girl. I can mention her because it's all over the papers and everything. And they were only allowed 5 water stops. And
so allowed what?
5 water stops.
5 water stops.
During the marathon race, and she missed the last one.
Okay.
And she describes it beautifully. If you look it up on the internet, and she was, when her legs gave everything. When she came into the stadium, they had to do a couple of circuits round. She was like this, as if she was actually having a stroke, and nobody stopped to help her, because if they had, and she had won the marathon there before, that she had been banned. She nearly died, and I kicked up hell afterwards, because I was the only female chief medical officer at the time.
How did you channel that information through the
what we did
Olympic
was
medical?
No, what we did was that was when phones, emails and things were just coming out. So I sent a letter, I phoned and I sent an email to Prince de Merode, who was the chief medical officer. Okay. And I said that I know it's the Colosseum, but do we have to have a death to prove it?
Okay.
So we held an emergency meeting of all the Olympic officers, and I said the men's marathon is at night in the cool of the evening. Yeah. Women have to. Why do we have to die in the middle of it? Yeah. So. One Canadian idiot got up and said, well, what research have you got to prove this? I said, you don't have to have research to prove that. So they set up Olympic medical officers for each of the continents. Right. And I was put in for the Irish, because it was told, if you don't put her in, she'll cause trouble. But we were actually able to change the conditions. Sure. That now, if it's more than 28 degrees, they cannot run. Right. It's too dangerous. So that was one of the things. But
So the race that John Tracy got a silver in LA, isn't that right?
He got. That was his first marathon.
Get away.
Yeah, he'd been at 5,000 and 1,500, but 10,000 before that.
I watched that on the telly while I was in America, and the American commentary team didn't mention him until about the 22nd mile.
No, they didn't see him.
And he was right. He was there and thereabouts, but they didn't mention his name until towards the end.
He's got a very odd running gait.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was amazing, but he did incredibly well.
Amazing.
Oh, he certainly did.
Yeah.
And but the other thing was that all the Americans thought, oh, they were all Irish, and Hugh Hefner, you've heard of him. Well, Hugh Hefner had done a deal with Waterford Glass, and they had made Olympic medals out of Waterford Glass to sell, and he invited the executive to go along to his house. So I was a member of the executive honorary medical officer.
So you went to the Playboy Mansion?
We went to the Playboy Mansion. We had lunch there.
I'm so disappointed, Moira.
We didn't
Fantastic.
see him. He was in bed, and we saw this sunbed, and thought, "What the hell do you have a sunbed there?" Well, the current girlfriend had to sleep with him all day, so if she wanted to keep her tan, she had to have that. So
you're telling me the other famous person that you...
Jane Fonda.
Was Jane Fonda. You met her in LA
yes.
as well, and she said you're a friend of yours for
quite a while.
Day.
Yeah. She invited the Irish girls to go there, to have breakfast with her, and to go to one of her workouts.
Right.
And we were able to kind of. She was just saying, "Oh, well, you've got to do is touch your toes." I said, "No, they don't. If you've got a bad back, you do not touch your toes. It's just going to cause problems." But she was she was the best educated person. She was way ahead of her time, all about nutrition.
Sure.
She was charming. Her little boy was 16, and they had a farm up in really nice. Kept in touch with her for a couple of years.
And you were saying also you're invited to dinner by an ex-Olympian from Trinity here, one of your medical students?
Yeah, Darren Barber, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was so lucky because in America, because they're very strict about the rules, I had to get an American who was qualified in he was in surgeons, but he had his sports medicine qualifications in the States as well.
Right.
And so he came with us to a few of the things. But we met quite a lot. Darren took us out for dinner, and the other person who invited us out was Gary O'Connor, who was married to Fionnuala Flanagan, the actress.
Okay.
And they invited the whole team up to their house.
Wow.
Gary was an ex-student of mine.
This is in the Beverly Hills now?
Up in Beverly Hills.
No way.
And they had the whole lot went up, and the boxers came, and they discovered that the house was open.
Yeah.
They discovered that they had a waterbed. They were jumping up and down on the waterbed. So we said, "Get out of there!" So we were just so lucky that we met an awful lot of people, and we saw the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But
and in terms of female participation then in LA,
we're very good.
It was much better than.
Oh, much. Well, Caroline O'Shea was the 800-meter runner.
Right.
I'm still friends with Caroline after all these years, and that was in the race where Zola Budd, who's the South African who ran without shoes, she tripped and she knocked down the American.
What's her name? Yeah.
It just got blank.
Yeah.
But there was chaos. I mean, the American girl was very bad sport.
There was lots of tears, I remember.
Very much.
Yeah.
They actually produced dolls that cried. But Caroline was fantastic.
Oh gosh.
I'll think of it in a minute.
We got our people to look the name up.
Yeah, but we had a lot more girls participating this time. There were quite a few. But
may I ask, were drugs an issue or doping? Was that an issue then?
Oh, it was very much so.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that time, Adidas, or Adidas, what they like to call it, they had an agreement with Samar. At that stage, Samaranch was the new president.
Samaranch,
And that nobody who ran with them would ever be found positive. And it depended. There was so much politics, and it made. I mean, we were very lucky in LA. We were walking down the street, and we suddenly went in to buy a birthday card, and the next minute we heard screams and yells, and this was somebody who had been in the mental home had got out, and was driving a car, and he wanted to go back in, and he killed about 10 women.
Oh my God!
And if we had not gone in to buy, we would have been dead. Wow. And it was also a couple of the athletes went down to Tijuana without permission. That was when they had the shooting down there. So it could be very dangerous.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
But we survived. We made a lot of friends.
So when you came back for that, then your high performance facility was up and running then in '85, you say?
In '85, I was appointed just at Christmas in the end of '84, and I came down to Trinity in '85. So I came on the only condition that I would be able to do sports medicine.
Yeah.
And it was very funny because when they said I want to do sports medicine, they kind of looked at me. This is at the board meeting.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I didn't care whether I got the job or not. So I said, I know this is the only exercise that some of you do, but exercise is important. So they gave me the job. So when I went there first, when you went into the anatomy department, it was just a full of old tanks and things, and it was a mess. So I got them to clear out and put in a new floor. We got the first isokinetic machine.
Right.
And we borrowed Bernard. I met Bernard Dunn, who is the genius behind the lab.
Right.
And Bernard.
So what's an isokinetic machine?
Isokinetic machine measures muscle strength in the different phases. There are 3 ways of contraction. There's contraction and you don't change. There's concentric and eccentric. And the concentric is the one that's described in all the anatomy books. But the weight, if you want to build up, you lengthen it as you're contracting.
Okay.
And the thing is that when one group of muscles is doing concentric, the opposing group has to be eccentric, and you've got to know that,
right?
Because otherwise you don't. But when you come to Trinity first, you get a present. You can buy an expensive thing.
Yeah.
So I got the most expensive thing I could think of, and this was the first isokinetic machine in
Ireland. Was
in
it?
Ireland. Oh yeah. And we set up, and when the Americans came, we had to get it from America. They didn't even realize we had a different current.
Oh, right.
So Bernard had to tell them.
Oh, gosh.
And Bernard was the experimental officer in physiology. So I stole him. And he worked with me for 30 years. And he set up the lab.
Yeah.
We did clinical.
So what else would you be measuring then in athletes here?
Oh, we all did. The most important is the medical history.
Medical history, okay.
Medical history. We always did a whole series of bloods. And at this stage, with every penny that we got in, we would buy an extra piece of equipment. So at the end, we had rowing machines, we had machines for cyclists, we had machines for kayakers, etc. But in the early days, we only had the treadmill and the bicycle. And we looked at their diet. We looked at everything.
So how did the Irish athletes, as it were, link with you? Like, were they sent by the Olympic Committee, or
no? I was still in charge.
Oh, you're okay.
I was the honorary medical officer for 3 Olympics.
Okay.
So
they all came to you then?
They all came.
Oh, right.
And we tested I don't know how many people.
Yeah.
But also we had to anybody who had a problem, we knew who to send them to.
Right.
It's not always the person on television. is the person who knows the sport and knows what's required of the sport. And the psychological side was very important.
Sure.
So we had John Connolly, he did all our assessments. And Bernard, I mean, we did clinical trials for osteoporotic. That was after the Olympics. But for the LA Games, we tested everybody. We also tested, again, all the supporting staff.
Okay.
To make sure, because they were very limited in what. In Seoul, we didn't know what was happening.
So we come to Seoul now. So that was an amazing games.
It was
a wonderful part of the world to visit.
They were so nice.
Yeah.
But again, this was you had to have so many more extra inoculations.
Right.
So you had to start early for the potential ones. And you see, a lot of the people who were originally going to go, who had qualified, got injured. So that therefore you had to test a lot more people.
Sure.
And you don't inoculate or vaccinate people just a week before you're going. You have to do it quite a bit beforehand.
Sure.
Again, we did the usual thing, the dentals, but we were able to. We still, at that stage, Roel Callallen was no longer president of the IOC, but he was honorary president of the Irish Olympic Committee.
Right.
So we tested him and we looked after him. He was a gentleman. He was fantastic.
He seemed like a very nice person, right?
Exceptionally nice, and his wife was lovely as well.
Yeah.
So, but what we did was we had to arrange. Again, we had another meeting with the Olympic medical officers, because we had to look at their emergency services. Where, again, the sailors were in Busan, which was different, and the question were in a different place.
Sure.
So that it was to try and judge this. And at this stage, you had people, you had to bring your own medication.
Sure.
Anybody we had a diabetic, we had a couple of other people that had to have, and particularly the staff. Some of them were, the older people were on medication. They had to bring it with them because we didn't know whether they would be there. Yeah. We did this for all the games.
Sure.
And so that when we arrived there was controversy. We did the same thing, but I insisted that I pick who went to sleep with the accommodation.
Yeah.
Because you can't have somebody getting up to train at 5.
Yeah.
With somebody sleeping in later on.
Sure.
But it was very wet.
In Seoul.
In Seoul. But they had a place called Itaewon, which was a street where they sold loads of Gucci and things like that. They were all kind of things that
bling.
Bling. And it was very funny. The things that were very cheap there were fur coats. So I went with a couple of people and in shorts went in to have a look, and they didn't believe in this, so they stayed outside and they were photographed, but they didn't realize they were standing in front of a sex shop. But we again, I was lucky. We had a lot of people that I knew from before, and it's the Olympic family. I mean, the medical officers are there. That made all the difference. But one of my best friends was Peter Fowler, and he was the Canadian Olympic doctor. I mean, he's well renowned. He was the best orthopedic surgeon in the world. He's actually swam for Canada as well. Right. And I happened to be in the Canadian camp.
Yeah.
When Ben Johnson broke the record, and they said that Samaranch, that he'd been found positive. But what it turned out was he had changed his alliance with the shoe people. But we discovered later, and I met him about 10 years after this, so, his urine had been fixed by somebody else while he was in there. He had been on anabolic steroids, but he had stopped them 3 months beforehand. And the one that was found in his urine was one that he had never taken. And this was to protect an athlete from another country.
Get away.
And he lost everything. One of the nicest guys you could meet.
Ben Johnson.
Yeah. Because they, Garode, you know Garode Towie, who's one of our Olympians?
Yeah.
Garode was involved in setting up a special charity called Crossing the Line. This was for Olympic athletes, or elite athletes anyway, who had to either retire because of injury or suddenly they had a major problem. And that they worked with New Zealand and Australian people, and when they did the research, they found that the suicide rate was incredible.
Really?
And so Ben Johnson and the American Greg Louganis.
Oh, Greg Louganis, yeah.
He was the guy in Seoul that he was a diver. He'd already won 2 Olympic golds.
That's right.
And at the second last dive, he hit his head, his chin bled, and he had AIDS. And nobody knew except his coach.
Yeah.
And he didn't know what to do, and he said the coach had done so much for him. So that he went up, and his last dive was perfect. Okay. And he was incredible. We met him at the actual at the meeting that was held here, and that's how I know the stories. And you know, everybody forgets how much they put in.
Sure.
And that not to make it is disastrous.
Was that the game where Florence Griffith Joyner was?
Yeah.
And Florence Griffith Jones?
No, I think she was that was Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah.
But it's you know, it's very difficult when you know everybody else is doing it. And
Sure. Yeah.
And they put so much into it, but it's cheating.
Yeah.
And it destroys their lives afterwards too.
Sure.
But you know, it's you meet some really good people.
Yes.
And the other kind. But the thing is, power corrupts.
Sure.
Absolute power corrupts completely.
Sure.
And the thing is that if you're honest and straight, then the athletes will trust you.
Sure.
And you tell them the truth. That's what it's all about. You protect them.
I always remember you telling me after Seoul, because I met you, and that you could tell the athletes that were on growth hormone.
Oh yes.
Because
the
lower jaw still grows.
So
as an anatomist, you could see
straight away
who was on growth hormone. Were there?
This was
not
China.
necessarily there were tests for that at the time.
Oh, but they were, but you see, you can't prove it unless you see. But the whole secret, what they did was they did it off competition.
Yeah.
It was only when they brought in competition. But this, in certain countries, particularly I'll never forget her. She was 7 foot tall, but she'd actually must have been given it as a child.
Given some growth hormone as a child, yeah.
And continued, because that's why she was so tall. But at this stage, she had all the signs of acromegaly, which is after puberty.
Yeah.
And a huge jaw, which is just, she could barely walk.
Yeah.
But you see, the trouble is that after a while, the muscles develop, but then they waste.
Sure.
So it's not fine. But I think the message that I would like to put across was that I got involved in osteoporosis because the athletes were overtrained, they were stressed.
Yeah.
Particularly the ones that had to make weight.
Right.
And that to do this, they've got to start bringing education back into the schools, because most of the bone is laid down between the ages of 8 and 20.
Right.
And the thing is that teach them how to run, even just jumping in, doing a couple of star jumps in between class.
Yeah,
skipping anything. But just the studies have been done in Canada that showed that just by doing jumping on the spot in between classes, they listen more.
Okay.
They're brighter. All right, to encourage.
And the bone density
that's when 60% of the bones you'll have. But also to get rid of bloody phones, because it's the social media is killing people. Particularly if you've got a bright kid who's good at athletics, they will make comments, and we can't let our kids be destroyed, because there is a sport or an exercise for everybody. To know that cycling is non-weight bearing. swimming is non-weight bearing.
Yeah.
Everybody should learn how to do something that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Because you force a kid into something, and if you put them under pressure, and the worst over the years, the worst athletes that I've met with problems are when their parents have never been involved, and they're trying to get their kids they're trying to win medals through their kids.
Right.
And you have to love what you're doing. And I think that they should have the best coaches for the young people. Teach them the skills properly, so that they don't. And we did, I worked with Western Australia. We did, one of the master's students here did a thing on the clumsy child. It's just, it could be they can't hear properly, they've got very flat feet. You could just, the old system here, they used to examine the kids.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore.
Okay.
And it's to make sure that they love what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And teach people to talk,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and to help one another.
Sure.
Because if you work hard, you play hard. You have a good life.
You can play hard, yeah. So you got back from Seoul then.
Yeah.
So what happened then?
Then they changed it, and I was no longer the medical officer.
Okay.
And but the first thing was that they changed the post from honorary medical officer to a medical officer with no power at all.
So employed but no power.
Well, we weren't employed. You did it all for free.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't paid a penny, but I didn't mind that. I did the satisfaction of doing something properly.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
But then after that, they've now got 20 people doing what I did. But I was lucky. I had very good help from the people that I worked with.
Yeah.
Particularly Bernard. And Bernard, from then on, we tested most of the athletes. We looked after them, we monitored them.
Yeah, yeah.
They would come to the lab, they would be tested, they would be corrected. And when we set up the Masters in 1990,
Okay.
we did a lot of the Masters students, they were either doctors or physios, worked on some of them. They collected the data. And we learnt that what to look out for. How to prevent things, and to kind of emphasise that if you're injured, tell it straight away.
Right.
But if you look at the people, we would know before each Olympics, before the game started, who was going to win and who wasn't.
Really?
Because there were people that you saw all the time and suddenly they didn't appear.
Yeah.
Or there were others that you never saw and
Yeah.
suddenly appeared.
Yeah.
And just looking at somebody's faces, you've got to be able to listen to what they say and their body language. And you're not taught that this was instinctive.
Sure.
In my generation.
Sure, sure.
But they don't do now. They tick boxes. They don't look at the people.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing I recall you telling me that you could determine what an athlete's what sport they were suited to. Whether they were sprinters or endurance.
Oh, very much. We did lactate testing. Yeah.
You'd be able to by your analysis, you're able to say, stop doing the 1,500 meters, do the 10,000 meters.
Very much so.
Like that, yeah.
But what they don't realise is the kids are far better at long distances because their muscles aren't developed.
Right.
The sprinters. But you always have a freak, you know, who is good at everything.
Sure.
But the thing is that they're the kids you have to protect.
Sure.
Because if they get concussion, I mean, back in the 80s, I worked with the COS program, but with the Jim Tunney, and we get 30 recommendations that there should always be somebody there who knew how to do CPR.
Right.
That they should not be forced to do things, that if they're injured they should be taken off, and particularly in any of the contact sports. Gary Lineker I met, he's the soccer guy.
Yeah.
And he said he never headed the ball except he knew he was going to score a goal.
Right.
But he was one of the educated soccer players. And the other thing is that every athlete must have an alternative way of earning their living. Because if they don't have something to fall back on, then I can remember a little boxer that I saw, and I mean he's now an alcoholic, but he's because boxing was the only thing he knew. This is going way back. Yeah. So education is the important thing, and there's a job and there's a sport for everybody, but they must enjoy it. they mustn't be forced.
Sure.
And I think that the government should, I mean, funding all the elite athletes is a good thing, but it's the people trying to make it. They're the ones that need the funding.
Right.
Because once you've achieved something, you get all the sponsorship.
Yes, yeah.
And they're looking at it the wrong way.
I see what you mean, yeah.
And that if somebody, it shouldn't be, if you've got a problem, and lots of them have, they've got to have somebody who knows how to talk to them, who's prepared to listen.
Sure.
And I mean, I still see some of the ones that I looked after 30 years, 40 years ago.
Sure.
But it's you've got to like people, and you don't do it for money.
No.
You can't charge people that you're looking after.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think that Trinity has done a lot.
Yeah.
And that lab is still going.
Yes. So Neil Fleming.
Neil is now one, but Neil was nearly made it to the Olympics. He was a great kayaker.
Yeah.
But you see, if they get injured just beforehand.
Yeah.
But he's there. Nick Money has. Nick has done an incredible amount of work.
Good.
But it's nowadays you get. When I was in the anatomy department, everybody was medically qualified. Doesn't happen anymore.
Sure.
They've got far too many students, not enough staff.
Yeah.
And they're not taught how to answer or listen.
Sure.
You can't if you're short staff.
Sure.
And they judge people by the research. But if you've got such a heavy teaching load, you can't do that.
Sure.
And they should be. This is my pet hobby horse.
So do you have any more sort of fascinating Olympic stories from your times at the three Olympics?
Oh.
Or any good reflections from Trinity graduates who you would have...
that I've taught?
That you've taught or helped in their Olympic status?
Well, nearly made it. I don't remember whether you know Niall Downey. Niall qualified, I think it was, I've forgotten, about 80-something. But Niall was the late 80s. Niall was a fantastic cyclist,
right.
And he nearly made it.
Yeah.
He had, when he was in fourth year, he was also a very bright student as well.
Right.
And he had to decide whether he wanted to go into the medical side or the cycling side. But workaholic, fantastic genius, and he was from Derry, so he went to. He qualified from here, did his house jobs, qualified as a cardiothoracic surgeon, and was brilliant. And he did so many courses and everything. He had to give up cycling because you just couldn't compete at that level.
Yeah.
So just before he was applied for jobs, and people with less qualifications were getting it.
Yeah.
So he said to hell with it. He saw an ad in the paper for Aer Lingus pilot. So he set in his resignation, and the day he was leaving, they said, your list is there tomorrow. He says, I resigned a month ago. So he left. He's now flying jumbo jets. He's the captain there. He kept up his medical skills for quite a long time. And then he looked at the difference between how the aviation industry, if there's a problem, they find the problem, they sort it out. If it's in medicine and you say there's something wrong, the whistleblower, your life is destroyed, because they will not do anything about it. And the number of accidents that are medical accidents that are happening now due to the expecting staff to do 12, 14 hours with inadequate support, doing special surgery. This is criminal. There's so many administrators. They need, if they want to sort out the system, they have to do what Ronald Reagan did with the air traffic control. Nobody will do it though. Get rid of the rubbish, the administration. Make it. No, I have two medical students that I know. They're both qualified. They've both got their postgraduate degrees. They have a small baby. They have to pay $2,000 a month for childcare. They're trying to buy a house, but they can't. Nobody's going to stay here under those conditions, because if you go to Australia or Canada, you've got the facilities to do what you want, is to improve. But if you're too tired, you're afraid of making mistakes, and this is what needs to be done. I mean, I'm saying this all the time, but Michelle will probably kill me because I'm saying it. But this. I've stood up and said what the truth all the time. People don't like that. But you're thinking of the welfare of the person, of their kids. And I mean, to learn things by heart. I mean, tick boxes. You've got to go back to the old style. You get them to talk to one another. You know, get them to a subject. Get them to work together and then ask one another questions. And nobody gets the same thing out of it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree totally. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a real influx of medical students or qualified doctors to Australia, for instance, where the working conditions are much better and they get much more.
Well, they have a life.
They have a life, yeah.
They have a life, and it's the same with Canada. But I'd like to
If I can take you back to the Olympics, though, so you also helped, didn't you, the Norwegian team in the Winter Olympics?
No, I was a guest of the Norwegian.
Oh, you were a guest of the Norwegian
I was the
team.
guest, but a lot of the Norwegian, as part of the European Olympic medical setup that Prince Road set up after Los Angeles, I was the only English-speaking person on it. The chairperson was an orthopedic Czechoslovakian, but one of them was a Norwegian, and Ingard Lerheim said that we made recommendations, and I said, he showed me his paper, and I said, Ingard, your English is not as good as you think it is. So I changed it all for them. And he said that if we ever get the Olympics, because I taught so many Norwegians, they said, you'll be a guest of the Norwegian Olympic Committee. So I was. I mean, lots of people promised this, but it was great.
Lillehammer or something?
Lillehammer. Yeah. It was the most, normally they had very bad weather. It was, the sun shone the whole of the time. We got a chance to watch the ice hockey, went to things, and there was one of there were about 10 of them, the Norwegian students that had taught in surgeons.
Get away.
That were acting as doctors or participants. So it was wonderful.
Sure.
But they had they have to do national service, and the number of people in doing national service, they can get a musical band out of it. And we went to a concert at that, and then I was taken down to a dive afterwards. But they were so friendly, and because I taught so many surgeons, I learned some Norwegian, so I was able to pretend I knew a lot more than what I did. But it's helping people.
Yeah.
And to kind of show how much they put into.
Sure.
But the ice hockey, Pete Fowler, the guy I spoke of before, Pete was the doctor to the ski team from Canada, and we would talk about hockey. And field hockey, I was talking about, that's not hockey. It was a wonderful, and he was the first orthopedic surgeon to set up a proper multidisciplinary, and this is the whole point, that we always, when we run our courses, there was always doctors and physios. Most places it's doctors only, but doctors aren't taught how to examine as much. So from that point of view, so it was wonderful.
Very good.
So I was very lucky to have had the opportunity to go to all these places.
Yes, yeah.
And at my 90th.
You're 90 years of age. This is amazing.
20 of the Norwegians that I taught in the 70s came over to my birthday party. So we keep up the friendship. The same with a lot of the Australians that did medicine in Trinity. If they couldn't come, they sent a little video for me. Sure. So I've been very lucky.
Good. Very good. Is there any other Olympic things you want to say before we finish? Any other stories that came into your head?
There are a lot that I can't.
Yeah, there's a lot you can't say.
But I think that the most important thing is that you've got to be there to support and help people.
Okay.
And it's the ones that are fragile. I mean, and we had one case where we had to have somebody looking after somebody all the time. You know, nowadays it's changed an awful lot. It's totally different. That in those days, if you competed on the first day, you stayed till the end. Now, when you compete, you're out. Well, there are a lot more people doing it, and I don't think they got to know. They don't get the opportunity to know, because there's so many more, and it's fantastic to see that they've been looked after so much better, because there's so many people.
Sure,
And I mean, the rowers particularly.
Sure.
I mean, I got to know a lot of the rowers very well. And it's when you see it's the sons, a lot of the people that are taught, I mean, Sam Lynch, his wife, and Guru, I didn't teach Guru, but I looked after him, and also Mark Pollock. People are there, Mark particularly, he wasn't an Olympian, but these are the people that are an example of having problems and getting over them.
Sure.
And I think that this is, that if you have a problem, go early.
Sure.
Don't wait. It's not going to get better. But you need the right person to go. And I think that Trinity is doing that now, which makes, and the big thing, the scholarship system here, and insurgents, that giving funding to the people who are going to get an education, but they need the extra money so that they can train at the same time.
Sure.
And I think that's a wonderful thing. But teach the kids when they're young.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much, Moira.
Not at all.
Great pleasure interviewing you.